Good evening, everyone. It's just after 6 o'clock Eastern, so we'll get going with this session tonight. Thank you so much for being here. There's still quite a few people to come in, but we will welcome you as you arrive. This is being broadcast also live on Facebook at the same time. We're delighted to be partnering this evening with Charlottesville-based Early Music Access Project, whose artistic director is David McCormick, a board member of EMA. And he's joined today by countertenors Reggie Mobley, who's also a board member, Patrick Dailey, and the baritone James Dargan for an in-person discussion this evening on approaching slave songs and spirituals from an historical performance perspective. Last week, on the 22nd, you may have already watched the first in EMAP's virtual series, Expanding the Narrative. I encourage you to watch it if you haven't already seen it, and I will put the link to that in the chat, because it covers both the specific spirituals, the performance thereof, and a discussion on how to program them and perform them, and that's what we're going to continue today. Expanding the Narrative by EMAP is a virtual series aiming to center Black music and musicians in the story of early music. And as Early Music America, this is incredibly important, obviously, that we look at the early music of our country. It was clear after last week's discussion that there was a lot more to say. So we are delighted to be able to bring everybody together this evening for a live hour of discussion. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody's microphone is muted on entry, and we suggest you use speaker view rather than gallery view just to get the best experience. You can click on the view icon in the top right of your Zoom screen. If you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, please use the Q&A feature. The chat feature is really just for general comments. So questions to the panelists in the Q&A, and we will go through those toward the end of the session. The discussion will be recorded and it will be posted on YouTube later tomorrow, and we'll be distributing it in other ways as well. So last thing I would like to say is, of course, you already knew this, but tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. And if you would like to help musicians, early musicians in need, but all early musicians are in need, quite frankly, right now. We are reopening the EMA Relief Fund on Wednesday. And in order to do that, we need to refund the fund. We already have about 5,000 or 6,000 in from various sources. But tomorrow the focus is on Facebook. And Patrick, who's here with us tonight, very kindly made us a video over the weekend. And I encourage any of you to make a donation. If you can, tomorrow, I'm just going to post the link right now in the chat. I'll post it again at the end. Please go ahead and make a donation. All of those donations go directly to musicians starting from Wednesday morning. At this point, it's time to hear from David, James, Reggie, and Patrick. And I'm going to hand you over. I'm going to be off the video for the time being, but I'm going to be here, and we'll be looking forward to hearing your questions later this evening.
All right. Thank you, Karin, and thanks to Early Music America for hosting this extension of a discussion that started a while ago with these three amazing vocalists. And I'll invite them to join me on screen here if they would. So this conversation really sort of took off last week when we posted it. About 250 people watched it live, and something like 1,400 have watched it all told in the last week. And we frankly did not stop having this conversation when we stopped the record button. And we're ready to keep going. And so we're looking forward to your questions. And I naturally have some questions of my own for these guys that after going back through these interviews several times in the editing process, more questions certainly presented themselves that I wanted to ask. And actually their performances came to me after our interviews. And so after listening to them, I had the most questions. So I want to start with James, and we're going to hear just a little bit of your performance, about 30 seconds of Over My Head, and then I have a question to launch things off here.
Cool, cool.
I'm hopeful that we'll hear your excerpt.
I wonder.
So you are not hearing me.
We're hearing it now.
You're not sharing this. Okay.
There it is. So in your introduction to this piece, you referred to sort of an old style, a melismatic style, and I didn't have the presence of mind in that moment to ask you more about that, and so I would love if you would just expand on that idea a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually good that the excerpt didn't even get to some of the melismas that came later, because it is not so much the deployment of melismas, it is painting with the voice, right? So it doesn't just encompass, the technical definition of more than one note on one syllable. It also encompasses the slides, and or we would, learned folks like us would call them portamenti, right? Um, but it encompasses also those moments where you let the roughness into the voice, where you let a little bit of dirt into the voice, when you let a little bit of sunlight into the voice, when you do all of the things that you do to be expressive, hopefully in all literature. And the reason that I'm glad that you asked about that is because actually of a question that we got on our previous conversation right before Patrick's Black Excellence broke the internet and started the Facebook live video over. I got a question from an early music colleague of mine in New York who asked if the kind of changing the way that you sing the same words when you repeat them is the same kind of thing as in the quote unquote early music canon with kind of the rules of rhetoric that we use to vary repetition. And he asked, in fact, if we would use those same rhetorical rules of repetition when teaching someone to perform spirituals. And at first I was like, sure. And then I thought, actually it goes a little deeper than that. Because in a spiritual, you never sing the same words twice. And by that I mean, just because you say the same syllables, the same phonemes, in Black vernacular, whether you call it African American vernacular or Ebonics or any number of the dialects and patois that we have made, saying the same words never means the same thing. So it literally means something different. And the example that I came up with while thinking of this was actually something my grandma on my father's side, the one who lived in the small postage stamp sized town of Pageland, South Carolina, her name was Vashti, which is a good old Black woman church name, Vashti Brewer Dargan. And when she would answer the phone, she, like a lot of Black people and older people who were born before fiber optics, would both shout at you through the phone, but also she had a kind of a canned response to "How are you?" which for her was, "Oh, I'm just waiting on the Lord, just waiting on Him." Now, she says the word waiting 3 times, but it has a different meaning each time. It's not the same word. right? So she would use a different tone for each of those three parts of that parallelism, as she would say. So for me as a singer of spirituals, and I'm sure for Patrick and Reggie and all of our colleagues that we know are raised in this style, the melismas come from the fact that you're never saying the same words or singing the same words twice. So why would you sing the same notes twice? So straight from Vashti, that's the best I got.
I love it.
Yeah.
Excellent. And that you of course you have segued perfectly into my question for Patrick. Of course you have. But before I ask it, maybe Karin, if you could play the excerpt from Patrick's performance, and hopefully it will not break the internet like it did last week. We're missing sound, Karin.
Gotta share that. Keep that amazing technique though, guys. Oh, so good.
Patrick, you broke the internet again.
It's just too good. It's just too good.
We go back to the beginning. Oh, sorry.
Verse 6, 8.
Oh, yeah. So I'm not even a little bit ashamed to admit that when you sent this to me and I listened to it for the first time, that I wept. I think we may have had this conversation before, but it reminded me of the reactions that were supposed to have happened in Baroque era rooms to beautiful singing, of people, just losing themselves in that moment. And it got me thinking about these parallels. And when James mentioned rhetoric, he anticipated a little bit sort of my question about sort of what we can learn in both ways. I think there's something that any early music singer can learn about sort of the text declamation, if you will, of a well-sung spiritual. And I think that there's something to think about. There's maybe a framework that our performance practice brains can use. Thinking of sort of the principles of rhetoric as we're thinking about performance practice in spirituals. And I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, firstly, again, glad to be back. Yay, this is fun. Particularly when I guess I'll start with the approach to that particular arrangement from here. Just want to shout out the guy. The approach was really in some ways, it's sort of and it's how apropos, because Roland Hayes himself was also known as a great leader singer, and in many ways, it was like singing, Erkanik. I was basically pulling in on pieces that are that have different characters. So you have the Sadducees and the Pharisees speaking to Jesus. Little boy, how old are you? Little boy, how? And and they're insistent. Maybe it's one asking, maybe it's two or three asking, but they keep wanting to ask who this little boy is, and then he says, "Well, I'm 12." He just looks up like, "Sir, I'm only 12 years old." Right? So he keeps going back and forth on this thing. Then you have the verses, which are the narrator, which would be like in Erkanik and many of these others, and much of German Lieder, right? So I think to a degree that does show up, particularly for somebody like a Roland Hayes, who has that background, who has that reputation. But also to echo much of what James said, none of these things mean the same thing. There's a different intent behind asking, how old are you? Some are literally wondering, like, how old are you? Some are like, I got to watch you. And there's a wariness behind it. Some are excited and like, oh, this is good. You got something coming. So there's always different intentions behind each of those texts. And so when we approach the text, you do want to give different stresses. And also you don't want to have it be boring in some way, right? On top of that, kind of to add on to this idea of switching things up as we go, more melismatic passages, variances. One of the things that we are taught, and I think it's taught everywhere, but it's one that I was really impressed upon while at Morgan State, was something that Dr. Nathan Carter would talk about much, was the idea of theme and variation. Introduce the theme. As you go along, vary it. And it has more room to change. That also gives you more room to change in terms of your intention. Doing a melisma, and I think that's the other thing that's different in regards to what you may have in something of the European aesthetic, which is like, okay, these are the things that are written down, and you have to find a reason to say it like this, or you have to find a reason to like that. You have to find a reason to do what they wrote down. This is, I'm not going to do it unless I have a reason. So my whole reason for making a change, I mean, there are things that I switch up in certain arrangements all the time. I'm not going to do it unless I feel it. I'm not going to do it unless it's going to be honest. And I have to have an intention for why it's going to go to that place, and also where it's going on the other side. So there is a full mapping that happens textually, technically, musically. We have to think about all of those things. And yes, to a degree, yes, but I would, and I think also to say that if the scholarship that comes oftentimes in early spaces, there's nothing wrong with scholarship, I'm all about it. But if the scholarship gets in the way of the truth, then you got to work out that balance. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. That's great. All right, Reggie, it's your turn. Karin, if you could play a bit of his Balm in Gilead. We're missing sound again. There he is.
To make the wounded whole, there is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain. But then the Holy Spirit revives my song again. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wound.
All right. I love that. So I love the very sort of the simple presentation of this spiritual, and it got me thinking a little bit. And I don't know if I am making something up here or not. So you can tell me if I am. But I wonder if there's sort of a performance practice difference between like the spiritual as performed in church that is meant to sort of stir the souls of the congregation, and the spiritual as performed in this case, I'm imagining, someone in a private space, comforting themselves. And I'm wondering if I've created a construct that doesn't actually exist, or whether there's something to it, or anyway, you can tell me what you think.
I see what you're saying, and there's I see there's something to what you're saying, but I think it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It can be for yourself, and it can be for everyone around you. I mean, that's the idea of a balm in Gilead, is that it suggests spiritual medicine, and what else is music but a spiritual medicine? And so I'm just presenting it simply the way I heard it and learned to sing it as a child in church growing up. And just knowing that when I first heard it and the way I've known it, it made me feel better. It made me feel calmer. And I think it's just I don't need to say too much about it. It's extremely direct. It gives you exactly what needs to be said. The words are there. They're plain. I mean, the melody is beautiful. It gives you exactly what you need, which is what music is, what music does. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. It can just be a simple melody, and it still has the power of all the emotion and all the intent behind it. And I just wanted to just present it the way I know it. There's nothing much else that I would want to say.
Nice. I love that. Yeah. I have sort of one other broad question to pose to all of you. And then I might turn it over to Karin, who has some questions that people submitted in advance. And I also just want to remind folks of the Q&A feature. Folks have been largely pretty shy that are on the call at the moment. And now's your chance. I'm running out of questions, so you have to start asking them. So it's a simple question, but I'm sure it's a complicated answer, which is kind of, where do we go from here? We've had this great conversation. What do we do next to sort of to create a performance practice to be thinking about? And it occurs to me that part of this is maybe like, what white influences do we need to strip away to get us there? So I'm going to open that up. I'm sorry if it's too broad a question, but.
I don't want to go first, for one.
Oh no, have I stumped the panel? I didn't mean to.
Could your question be
James.
interpreted to... Oh, go, Patrick, go, please. Yeah.
Oh, you go.
Oh, okay. All right. If you say so. Could I take your question to also be interpreted as, where do we go in terms of the structure of early music as it is right now? You with spirituals, where do we go from here in terms of this knowledge that we are sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because my very first thought when you asked that was removing the boundaries against Black singers using spirituals as audition and serious concert material. Because we all like to talk about who can sing spirituals, but Black early musicians are not allowed to sing spirituals almost ever to get a job, or to have them be seen as a serious part of a concert. Even though we've had Marian Anderson, somebody in the chat mentioned her, Leontine, Simon Estes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, feature spirituals in their recitals. The way that they are reviewed by the establishment, the way that they are glossed over in favor of, okay, let's get to the Schubert song. I love Schubert, but let's get to the Schubert song or the Charpentier cantata that we want to really laud this person for. And that disregard is not right. Just as it is not right to look at a Black singer entering a room to try to get a job and say, this music that is a part of your heart and soul, that is not a good enough way to evaluate what you bring as an artist versus the Et in Spiritum Sanctum from the Bina Manorans.
Yeah.
They should be, if anything, on par. So that just.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, if I was in an audition room and the three of you came in and sang those three spirituals, I would know exactly what you were capable of. So it's sort of unfortunate, and it's a little bit lame that that we don't get to hear the full range of what you can do, because of this idea of needing to sing these specific things in an audition room.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Patrick.
Yeah, I'm coming. Here I come. Before I really answer that, I saw a comment from someone, and I want to shout them out. This is Francis Perry, who is my collaborator for a Little Boy and also co-founder of Early Music City. So he and I are part of that. So I want to shout him out. Thanks, Francis. Brilliant musician and collaborating colleague. So I think the other side about where do we go is also, yes, this is really wonderful that we're having this conversation, with, Early Music Access Project. Of course, we're doing stuff with Early Music City. And then now having EMA and Early Music America being a part. Yes. Okay, the next step is also aligning or engaging and collaborating with the other institutions that are already available. The National Association of Negro Musicians, the National Association for the Study and Preservation of African American Music. I mean, there are others, right? But these are just two organizations, institutions that are about this work, about the work of Black music in this part. I think that's going to be the next step in engaging those organizations as well, so that it's not just, hey, we over here are doing this, can y'all come up under it? Actually, no, we've been doing it. We're trying to do it. Let's come together. And at some time, I think this is also going to be a tougher thing for a lot of us in many ways in the world, letting somebody else take the lead. Also engaging and also understanding how some of these other organizations have more to offer than squarely just the spiritual conversation too. So I think that's going to be a big deal. Like, I think I've talked about it before. There is a tradition, and I talked about it with David. I talked about a lot of folks. Like, if you've never been to a Black Church Messiah, you're missing out. Okay, there's nothing like it. It's the best. It's amazing. It has all of the joys and the excitement that you would expect from this Baroque period that's supposed to be all over the place. That's what it has. But it's done excellently, right? It's done with the scholarship. It's done with the preparation. So I think that there's room, and we talk about where do we go from here. I think that there's room and there's an opportunity to move not just the art form forward, but also the institution building forward as well.
Excellent. May I ask Karin to help be a air traffic controller for incoming questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Except there is a massive storm that has just happened right above my head. So the rain is battering down, and because I just moved house, my headphones have vaporized. So excuse the noise of the rain. It is quite extraordinary. There is a question that is sort of slightly what is in parallel to what you've been discussing, which is, as you approach the subject of early Black American music, do you think it's also time to consider and begin to value as early music the old musical traditions of immigrant communities whose music has been ignored, silenced, or appropriated?
I think it's important for those immigrant communities to be able to speak for themselves on that. Like, we can't speak for anyone outside of our own experience, and we shouldn't. Um, but I think they should, their voices should be heard, absolutely. But it's up to them, and it's not just up to them. It's up to the establishment. It's up to the mainstream people. It's up to white people to ask that question.
Exactly.
If you're asking us, ask them.
Me
Don't ask us.
Yeah.
And I think it's simple and direct as I can make it.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, here's Bill Doggett. Are the settings of Harry T. Burleigh a white influence or of smoothing? Hang on, I'm just trying to read this. A white influence or smoothing down of the slave song / spiritual? Hang on, I'm finding this difficult to understand. Can you guys see the panelist question?
Yes, right. He
It's
says, are the settings of Harry
the
T. Burleigh
settings,
a
are they a
white
setting, are they a white influence or a smoothing down versus a more earthly, deeply felt rough sound of the early Fisk Jubilee singers versus the iconic concert arranged spiritual?
Mhm. It's
I guess
inviting
that's a
comparison.
question about, the three different versions that many listeners here will have heard.
Mhm. I mean, this is like grabbing a hold of an elephant with one's eyes closed and kind of finding it to be the complete elephant in your mind, because and Bill is marvelously learned, so I feel like he's probably asking devil's advocate style, although I think Patrick knows him better than I do. But um, I see that as often the way that people who don't grow up in the tradition frame the question, which I think is why he framed it that way, to kind of lob a grenade into the conversation, which I love. If you're taking a cross country road trip and you take only 3 pictures, people are going to think that the country you're crossing is 3 different places. But it is one trip. So that those 3 versions, the concert spiritual, solo concert spiritual, the Fisk Jubilee Singers version, and the or early Fisk Jubilee Singers version, and the Harry T. Burleigh version, they are only different because they are 3 snapshots of a huge organism of all of the different ways that you could sing a spiritual. And as Patrick knows, Black people have done it a myriad of different ways. So, Patrick, you are the authority, I think, in this.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see. But I think my thing is this, and I've said it kind of in a sense before. Much of how these songs come to be, how we see them transported, is due to the technology and the mode of the time, right? So 1871, when the Jubilee Singers take off on their first tour, when Burleigh is at the American Conservatory with the Dvorak, the recording capabilities and sort of the proliferation of the recordings are not really available. So how do you take these songs down? You take them down, you write them, and of course I have to always shout out the John W. Works 1 through 3, as well as their brother as Junior's brother Frederick. If I'm saying, I think it was Junior. I might be messing it up, but Frederick Work as well, who they did write these things down, right? It's so much, because all of this also has it's always going to have this European influence. If we're going to use Fisk, and I've said it before, Fisk, like many of our dear HBCUs, which I'm proud to be a graduate of and proud to serve and proud to be a part of that community, most are not named, or many are not named. Yeah, I did actually went through this the other night. Most are not named for Black people, and many are not founded by Black people. So that also goes to say that there has not always been sort of the Black folks historically, like Indigenous people as well, and other communities, but particularly African Americans, have not always had the opportunity to develop and think and produce for themselves how they want to do it. So it's always going to have this influence. So there is going to be this idea of the smoothing down. I've seen somebody else write about that. There's going to be that so we can make it more palatable, because the other side that's different as well is that the sort of the European approach to music is also about commercial. It's also about selling. It's also about commerce. It's also about capital. So what's going to sell, what's going to get people in the seats, what's going to get people to buy records, what have you, so on and so forth, as opposed to more indigenous and African and ancient traditions, which are not necessarily about, yes, there's entertainment, but there's also a communal aspect to it, right? So if a Burley is going to school, paying money at a conservatory to be a composer, to be a singer, to be these things, he's also got to eat. He's going to work for Recording. And Recording wants to put this out. Recording needs to make some money so they can pay him. Right? So those things those things apply. Those things like give you that shape as to why maybe it's not going to go this way. Because what is going to appeal to a mass market? The field holler, the belt, the rougher sound that Mother makes of the line hymn is not necessarily, or at least we haven't allowed it to, sell. But also the next question is, should it? Because then that might take away some of its authenticity. So it makes us beg many more questions. So the question that opens up now leads us to 1,001 other things. Yeah.
I knew that has to eat was going to come in. I knew we were going to work that in there. Yeah. Especially right after Thanksgiving. Everybody's got to eat.
Do we have
Yes.
more questions?
Yes, well, and one, Marian Anderson came up in that conversation briefly, and one person has suggested, has asked, they'd love to hear what the panelists think about Marian Anderson's way of combining classical music with spirituals and what impact that had on her career. Was that something that, by including spirituals wherever she sang, do we feel that enhanced her career? And did she need to include, I wonder, include spirituals as a Black woman singer?
But it's interesting too, because by the time that Miss Anderson is coming along, she wasn't particularly the first to sing these songs. She probably sang them because she became the most well received in modern, and I think our modern sense, the most well-known, well-received Black singer, because there came others before her, Mary Salika Williams, of course, and some of the names are escaping me because I'm going by their colonized names, like the Black Patty and things of that name. Sister Soretta Jones, thank you. Thank you. Please, I want to call her name. So there were many others that had come forth prior, right? Also, singers like, Rosa Pansel and John McCormick and many non-Black singers have started including the spirituals, particularly of Burley, and art songs, Burley and others, in their concerts. So she wasn't, but it's that we have her doing it so much more. That is the factor there. But she wasn't the first. And by any means, I think that she definitely made a conscious decision, and also how people exhibit, how artists of different eras exhibit their protests, their activism is dictated in some way by the time. So this is sort of how she did it. She could go and stand in front of these rooms and stand in front of these people, and she may not have said anything, but what she was going to do is sing them. She was not, she makes a point to do them when she's in certain spaces. That was how she decided to do it, which is what allows now for a James Dargan to say, bump this whole thing, I'm gonna do it, right? Which is what allows for, Kendrick to put out, we gonna be all right, or it moves that needle because people like that, they pushed how they could in their spaces, which now allow us to do different things. So it depends on that era too. But yeah, she was definitely not the first. And there was a lot of, historically, these songs were popular. I think that she becomes, and in a sense, she kind of becomes known for it at that time more. And I think that also what she's done is be sort of the benchmark that many of us go back to. Miss Price went to that. Denise Graves speaks about going back to, like, Miss Battle, Simon S. All of these singers kind of say, well, what would Miss Anderson have done, right? Always going to that as sort of the benchmark. So yeah, that's how I see it.
She kind of wiped the slate too. She kind of cleaned the reputation of spirituals in America because, a lot of the ways that a lot of Black musicians unfortunately had to perform spirituals in front of other audiences was in minstrel shows. And they were, our music that we created, the music that is born of this nation, was not taken seriously. It was considered, it was lesser. The fact that, Stephen Foster thought his songs were a higher level than what was going on. And through Mary Anderson, she showed that this music, the spirituals and songs, this stands up next to every other composer on the program. And for all of you wide audiences, all of you audiences who listen and feel this as though these songs are not as important as Schubert or Bach or Rorem or anyone else, they are. This music is incredible, and it's probably even better in some cases. And it needed to be shown that it can stand shoulder to shoulder as American canon with everything else we have to offer. And that you need to understand that this music has always been here and it's time to stop ignoring it. Look at what we've created. And it begs to also maybe have the conversation of why it was created, which is probably why it's also ignored.
And just to add on to that, the reason, I think, in a sense, going all the way back to, of course, the Jubilee Singers, the reason why they had that, in part, why they functioned and they formed the way they did, was to be anti the minstrel show. It was going to be, no, we're going to stand up here very formalized and show you that we're not that. Because if I went and sang the songs in somewhat of a more natural state, if you will, I'm just using that as air quotes, and we can talk about the deepness of that or whatever. If I would have done that, then they would have said, oh, that's just another minstrel show coming through town. And that's not what this was. This was more of a reclaiming, more of a look of saying to the system that has oppressed you, I am capable, right? So I think that there are different things to look at. So you can even look at Miss, and I think I brought it up before, Miss Anderson, and many times you hear, she does, oh, wasn't that a wide river, because she's going to do that. It's a signifier to say, oh, no, I went to school. There are even recordings of Jubilee singers from the Jubilee quartets with that Roland Hayes is even a part of. There's a video of the Jubilee singers from like 10 years ago, and they were like, run, Mona, run. They were like literally rolling R's. But that was also to say, we're not that. We're not this. We're going to bash these stereotypes about us as well.
Yeah, I think the specific repertoire that Ms. Anderson sang at her Lincoln Memorial Concert is a very good example not only of the intention of not only what to juxtapose on a program, but also her attempt to, as Reggie mentioned, to show that she knew that the spirituals were on par with at least on par with anything else. Because if NPR is to be believed, which I was just checking quickly and make sure I didn't misremember anything, she sang, I believe, "My Country 'Tis of Thee." She sang an aria from La Favorite by Donizetti. And she sang Ave Maria by Schubert, the one that we all know. But then she sang three spirituals. So even the choice of the number of non-spiritual things to spiritual things, the percentages, right? That makes a statement without a word of polemic from the podium. So that her voice could just be both the preacher and the choir, right? In the best Black church tradition. Because sometimes the best way to say something is to sing it. So we see that pattern not only in her stuff, but in Leontine Price's program choices. Just for all of the people out there listening and watching, when you look at the program of one of these great Black singers, look at the percentage of non-Black music, quote unquote non-Black music, although it's all our music, to spirituals. Because a great artist, I believe, does not get to that greatness without thinking carefully about not only what they're singing, but who they're singing and who they're singing for. That's just something to throw out in the mix. Oh, we've got so many questions, guys.
I know that's very powerful. All three of you there. I think this is what's so great about this conversation, that we're able to go off in tangents a little bit, but also reinforce the relevance of this music to the repertory today. Question. Rhetoric has been established as an important element of early music from Bach to spirituals. I'm curious what rhetoric in general means to you, and what the similarities and also the differences are between the rhetoric of, for instance, Bach and the rhetoric of spirituals.
Nice.
Who would like to go first?
Come on, y'all. Not it.
I'll just say this real quick, and I think I've said it before, and I want to just kind of say it again. The rhetoric is also going to be dictated upon the intention. I've said it before about the difference between what you may see with Bach and others, and how they set text, and it was like, "Oh, woe is me, save me, Lord, I'm so dirty," as opposed to A Balm in Gilead or Swing Low or any of these other songs, "I am deserving of this saving." So automatically, we're switched around, because this other concept is telling me that I'm so dirty and I'm so low down and I'm so bad. But however, over here, I know this is not what I'm supposed to be. I am worthy of better than this treatment. And so I think that that's also going to play a role in some of that subtext, in some of how you lay out what you're going to say, how you're going to say it. Of course, there are simple things that we all do and have done that have similar effects, of stressing on this and like leaning into that vowel, leaning into this particular part, finding that, basing it in a certain harmony, like, okay, ooh, I'll lean in on that, or some things that are harmonic or but that are also text wise, and I may make something more breathy or make something more chest like or heady or what have you. Like all of those things apply, but I'm always going to talk about attention. That intention is going to base how you express that rather.
For me, I co-sign all of the richness of Patrick's thought about this in rhetoric. But for me personally, I come at rhetoric from accompanying my father to his classes for divinity school when he was studying for ordination. Because for me, rhetoric always blends with homiletics, which is just, sacred rhetoric, right? Rhetoric is the way that you deliver the message. You've been tasked with delivering a message, and it is your job to figure out how to do it. So for me, in spirituals versus Bach or somebody else, The difference, and this actually touches on a question that was put in the chat in the Zoom that we're on. Someone asked what role score study plays in spiritual singing. And in spiritual singing, I feel that if I have not lived with the spiritual for long enough to make whatever score I might have read it in originally, if I didn't know the score, the spiritual already, if I haven't lived with the spiritual long enough to forget what it looked like when I saw it on the page, it ain't gonna be ready. Because it hasn't marinated in my spirit enough for me to divine the intention that is going to use the notes in my voice to express itself. Whereas with a composer who communicated predominantly through the written note, score study is where it starts. But with spirituals, score study is so far in the past. Because the rhetoric has to be one of delivering the word. You can't be checking your notes, right? Reggie's got his thinking face on.
So what? I'm sorry. What? Oh no, I'm just listening intently. I'm here to learn as well, and I've learned a lot from both of y'all so much. And I think I mean, I tend to talk a lot about how there is actually there are so many ties and links between Bach and spirituals. And I think in regards to the rhetoric, I think when we think about it, both the works of Bach and the spirituals that were sung were not composed for someone else down the line to sing and play. They were the people who created this music, Bach and slaves and Burley and black people. We created it for us to sing. We created it to create a space and a platform to really convey these affects and emotions, and to give us a space to feel, and not just the singer and the player, but also the listener, and that the listener had the ability to join in with spirituals and things like that. It's I think the idea is that it was just very, very practical. It was meant to serve a purpose. Music is service with Bach. And for us, music is also a service. It's meant to do something. It's meant to change us. It's meant to convey a feeling, or it might be coded, meant to tell that, that someone's coming and we're going to leave this place now. But it's always about motion. It's always about moving. It's always about feeling. It's never just static and existing for its own sake. It's meant to uplift and help and move people. For Bach, his people, and for us, ours. And that's how I feel about that.
We've got a really cool question here. Is there a place for Nina Simone, the Nina of Four Women, in this discussion?
As in spirituals discussion or rhetoric? What do we think that means?
I don't know.
I'm either way. I'm going to say yes because it's Nina Simone.
Right.
It's Nina Simone.
Come on.
I think too, there are lots of things that's really interesting about Nina Simone because she falls squarely she falls squarely into this tradition of the spiritual that also intersects at popular music, that intersects at jazz, that intersects at all of these different places, and then also intersects at activism. So she falls squarely into that. She comes from North Carolina herself. Let's also be very aware, and I'm not trying to drudge things up because there are also some conversations that are had that are internal and intercommunal as opposed to out. But I'm just going to mention this idea of colorism. That here is this dark-skinned young Black girl from North Carolina whose initial desire. This is also interesting, and we can elaborate on it in many ways, and I'm sure there's scholarship out there about it. But her initial and the pathos behind this, but her initial desire is to be a concert pianist, to be in the halls like a Marian Anderson, to be at Carnegie Hall playing Rachmaninoff and Bach and all of that. That is her desire, right? So then she finds her way into the world and to the consciousness, not necessarily through that. Now she always intersperses, the Bach this and the Mozart that, and she always puts that in there. Chopin this and that, always showing you her vast musical knowledge and ability. But she doesn't get to be what she wants to be in many ways. And then on top of that, she moves into the activism space, right? Then she also that's it. Thank you, Holy Ghost, bringing it back. The voice and the singing. It's not the conventional bel canto approach that you would have as Cinnamon. So when you see Ailey do some, oh, Cinnamon, where you go? Yes, all of that, like lovely, like Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Like it's just Grady. It's raw, and it lays on that. I think that, and she, and it's not, and I think what she shows also that it's not supposed to be pretty, and it can still feel good, and it can feel good. It can move you. It can entice you. It can move you to action. It can move you to thinking. It can move you. It just has all of these different things, and depending on when you play it, it's going to give you a different reaction. So Nina Simone definitely fits within that because she's also very much she's very much competently the musician, but she also again falls squarely in line to this tradition that goes all the way back.
Things in support of what you're saying, Patrick, because obviously, for those of y'all out here who might not know this, I know Patrick and Reggie do, but Nina Simone's birth name was Eunice Kathleen Wayman, and she was the daughter of Reverend John Divine Wayman. She grew up in Tryon, North Carolina, which is I grew up in the city, North Carolina. Tryon is out there. It is not the city. She was one of 8 children. They were not fooling around. She was a child of the church, which is why she preaches like she does on stage. And in respects to what Patrick said about how she wanted to be a concert pianist, of course, she was rejected from her auditions at conservatories because of the color of her skin. And so she said herself that she never saw her style, even though she got her start playing in nightclubs and bars. And even though she, ended up headlining at, the Montreux, Jazz Festival and all these other places, she never called her brand of music pop, jazz, or anything in that realm. She called what she wrote and sang Black classical music. So she is one of the mothers of us all. I mean, give the queen her flowers, but like, this is the exact same trajectory. Somehow, Susan, I think, happened on a person that encapsulates the entire trajectory of what we are talking about. A child of the Black church wants to do classical music, not because she doesn't like what she's coming from, but because she can do classical music, is told no, and says, you know what? This is my thing, and you're going to like it. And we love it.
That's so cool. I would put her in the same camp as Florence Price then. I think I would put the two of them together because you have to ask the question when you listen to the music of Florence Price and listen to Nina Simone, and you're like, well, is it classical? Is it jazz? Is it spiritual? Is this gospel? Yeah. And the answer is yes. It is. This music, the music of Black people, probably has the power and ability to kind of break down those barriers of these structures and boxes that we've put music into. What is greater and better, what is lesser and more, what is, the idea that, that we would even consider this being something that we would study in ethnomusicology should not happen. This should be studied. This is musicology. This is our history. This is music. And I think it should spur on us to ask these questions and point them in a way that we haven't been before, and really kind of encompassing and saying where. And I think that kind of goes to your original question of where do we go from here, David. I think Nina Simone and Florence Price are where we go from here. I think it's time for us to really stop distancing ourselves, especially in organizations and institutions and universities that consider themselves research schools and who think about European classical, Western classical music as what it is. This is also what it is. It's time to introduce this into the canon. It's time to introduce this into the core curriculum at universities and schools. This is our music. this is the most important thing that we can do, is really kind of find our place through this music. And it has the ability to do that.
That's awesome. I just had this thought that we should all be taking a master class from Nina Simone on how to perform early music. The grit and the rhetoric is what we should all be thinking about to make really compelling early music of all kinds. And I'm just going to go away now.
Yeah, that's great.
It's like one of those questions when you're asked, who would you like to invite to your dinner party? I think we'd all like to have Nina Simone at our dinner party, wouldn't we?
Nina Simone, Florence Price, get some Margaret Bonds in there. Yeah.
Maybe realize that we need to have more women in this conversation too. So that's
Absolutely.
really important for a future conversation. There is a couple more questions. A few people have left, but we've gone past the hour. But we'll just wrap up with a couple more questions. Here's a nice comment. You're all such spectacular performers and powerful speakers. Yes, you are. Can you share where you're geographically based and how you're currently sharing your music and your work in your local communities? It would be wonderful to know more about the places and people you're connecting with and the art that you value the most.
I will go first and get out of the way. For the more important people, I will go first and get out of the way. I live in South Orange, New Jersey, and I'm very, very happy to. And at the moment, what I'm doing to connect with my community safely, of course, besides the singing that I do in my house that my neighbors hear, which is, oops, unfortunate. Besides that, I am doing performances of, virtual performances of Oh Glory, which is a program that I have been doing for many years, largely to help raise money for the South Orange Public Library. Because of Corona, and yes, this will turn into a commercial for them and for other local organizations. Because of the Rona, they can't have things like their normal book sale to raise money. So I've offered my services and will continue to do so with more performance Zooms to raise money for that organization. There's also the South Orange Performing Arts Center around the corner from our house. They are also raising money, and I'm also doing performances of Oh Glory and Oh Glory 2 remotely for them, as well as with my colleagues at the Piano Truck. And if you Google Piano Truck, you'll find they're doing classical music on a food truck model. They've bought a truck that has its own stage. They open the doors, they're outside, they can roll up anywhere and everywhere. And so we're doing some performances together, not only in South Orange, but also in New York, and now over to someone better.
Fine, I guess I'll go. I am currently in Boston. I'm at my home in Jamaica Plain in JP, and how I'm using this music, it's actually my background. Behind me is the First Church in Roxbury, in Roxbury in Boston, which is a historical black neighborhood. And it's here in this neighborhood that I get to stage my concerts with Hamlin Hine Society, where I work to kind of show the community that the music of people of color, the music of queer folk, the music of that isn't just the kind of accepted default, is here and has been around for a very long time, and that I'm hoping to use this music to help people understand that people of color, we have a stake in everything that goes on, that we've been around, we've been a part, we've always had a seat at the table. It's just someone else was sitting in it. That we are always here, and we always have been here, and that this music is a source of pride and something that shows that we belong in every possible space.
So I'm always going to start like this. I'm the great grandson of West Tennessee sharecroppers. My Pearl and Daddy Fred Slocum. My mother came to Nashville in 1966 to attend then Tennessee A&I State University, where she met my father, and graduated in 1970 and has stayed since. So I am a born and raised Nashvilleian. Down the street from Tennessee State is Meharry Medical College, and across the street from Tennessee State is Fisk University. My training and my and my impetus to even do what I do comes from experiencing the Fisk Jubilee Singers as a child, the Bobby Jones and the Nashville Super Choir, and Bobby Jones and New Life, and that's out of the gospel tradition, the band, the Aristocratic Bands of Tennessee State University, so much more, right? So I'm very much a part of that Nashville tradition. After going to Morgan State University, and it's important to also bring up Morgan and Baltimore, as well as doing my master's in Boston, coming back to Nashville in 2014, and I started teaching at Tennessee State University, which is directly across the street, a block away from my home church, Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. And that's where, of course, again, where that was my initial training ground. So I'm back in my home church at my parents' alma mater. I'm a child of Big Blue, right? And at Tennessee State, I am the founding director of the Big Blue Opera Initiatives, which is an outreach, performance, and training program for the vocal community of outreach, performance, training, and fundraising, I should say, which is a training program for the vocal community of Tennessee State, as well as HBCUs abroad in the city and beyond. I am a co-founder of Early Music City, Early Music Ensemble, which is sort of in almost, we could say, we should talk about it, akin to the work that our Early Music Access Project is doing of expanding what early music is and that definition. Oh my God, I'm the founder of the W Crim Singers, AKA Wakanda Chorale, professional vocal ensemble and residents of the Big Blue Opera Initiatives. And I feel like I've done something else. And I'm on a number of boards. I'm currently working with Nashville Opera as the director of the Nashville Opera Big Blue Fellowship Program, which is a series of master classes and forums for HBCU students, Fisk and Tennessee State students here in Nashville with industry professionals. I am also getting ready to work with Intersection Contemporary Music Ensemble on some projects there. So there's a lot happening. I'd be remiss to not shout out Salama Urban Ministries, which is also where I got my start on stage. I'm on their board, as well as Alias Chamber Ensemble. So, sort of working in both the act of performance, because primarily my performance career it would generally not be in Nashville because, most of the people aren't, hiring countertenors. So in the city, not, love them dearly. And there's no shade, just not, because there's nothing for me here. But, so I'm usually not working in the city, but I bring all of that happens in the city from elsewhere, which I've been able to go back to Boston and sing. There's a concert that's coming up that some friends of mine from Morgan and I did, that's streaming on Friday or Saturday, the 6th. So we're still putting out that music, but also seeing how all of those experiences from Nashville to Baltimore and the DMV to Boston and New York all have permeation all throughout. And I think that that's a big link that happens, of course, for all musicians, but particularly for African-American musicians who have sort of that stretch between the classical, if you will, and the church and all of those kind of things. So that's it.
Well, you three do the work of many more than three men, I think. It's extremely impressive. Thank you for sharing that glimpse of your lives with us all. I think it was very nice to get that personal view of you. I think we should probably wrap this discussion up today. There are all sorts of directions in which we could go, and they would keep us here all night, which would be fun until it's not fun. So I think maybe that's a discussion for another time. There are various discussions that we can continue with. And there are questions, I've saved the questions that we haven't been able to answer that we can address perhaps offline at a later stage. I would really like to thank you all. I mean, the three of you, Reggie, James, Patrick, for your scholarship, your commitment, your tenacity, the sheer brilliance of your voices that gives us such joy. I mean, really, as David said, tears spring into my eyes too every time I hear you, all three of you. David, thank you for what you have done in bringing these guys together and starting the story, expanding the narrative. It's time for us all to expand the narrative. We live, I don't sound American, but I actually have citizenship now. So I am of this country now, finally, and it's incredibly important to me that we expand the story and expand the definitions of who early music is for, who performs it, and what is it? We just keep on expanding. As we said before, let's just bring more people to the table. The table is really big. We
Yeah.
can throw up more chairs.
I want to jump in really quick to have an opportunity to just live on air thank these three gentlemen so much. You've given really generously of your time to me and helped me to learn so much getting ready for all of this. And I so appreciate that. And I don't want the moment to pass without letting everyone that's watching know how much it means to me that you've given so generously to this project, which I hope will continue. This was, I hope, episode 1 that we produced and premiered last week, episode 1 of many.
Yep, we'll continue to expand, I hope, David.
Thank you all.
So thank you all. Thank you to everyone who attended tonight. We appreciate that you took the time to take part in this. There will be many more. And please, if you would like to donate to help early musicians tomorrow, Giving Tuesday on Facebook, find Early Music America, go directly to the fundraiser and you can give there. They are not charging any processing fees. Every penny you give is going directly out to musicians starting on Wednesday morning. So please give generously. This is a time of year when musicians are particularly missing a large chunk of their annual income. So it's incumbent on those of us who can to help them out at this time. Thank you again. Good night to you all, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.